Thank you for joining us for the October version of the Coaches and Professionals program. We're super excited for this panel. I think it's a topic that isn't talked about, but definitely has a big impact on student athletes and on coaches. So really excited to have this conversation with you both about healthy communication practices. So Shannon and Jordan, if you want to each introduce yourselves, your name, your position, and kind of why you're so passionate about mental health and athletics. So Jordan, if you want to go first.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jordan. I am an assistant coach at Shepherd University for the women's lacrosse team. And I also help to coach a club team called Checkers Elite. And I help to coach their 2026 team. I am super passionate about mental health just based on kind of what I went through as a student athlete. I played lacrosse in college. So I am very familiar with the mental health world and kind of what our athletes go through on a day to day. So I try my best to be an advocate for it and kind of just someone for everyone to go to if needed.
Awesome. Shannon.
Yeah, so I'm trying to even remember the question. So I'm a sports psychology consultant as well as a coach. So I coach primarily like I guess high school age swimmers. And then on the sports psych side of things, I work with really anybody. So I've seen like graduated adults, college athletes, high school athletes, and I kind of similarly, like I found this field, I loved it because I needed it, had experiences with like mental health, and it has it has turned actually a lot into recently working with college athletes, working with teams, and there being a lot of issues with communication. So I'm very happy to be a part of this. I'll probably share some, but there's been a lot of like ups and some pretty big downs related to some of this. So I think it's a very necessary topic.
Interesting. I also have 2 degrees in communication, so I think it's something that you don't think about until you actually need it. So I guess we'll just start off with a very general question to kind of start this conversation. Um, Communication is a two-way street. So for both of you, or for either of you, if you have different kind of beliefs or different thoughts on it, should this communication kind of street be initiated by coaches, by players, especially when it comes to mental health issues? What do you think is the most effective way for that conversation to be started by which party? So Shannon, if you want to start.
Yeah, I feel like so many things. I'm probably going to just say like it depends, I think it does depend, especially from what I've seen based on age group. So I think communication between like college athletes and their coaches is going to and should be different than high school and middle schoolers and their coaches. And I'll say from like the more high school perspective, since that's the team that I coach or that age group, I try to, as the coach, take the lead on initiating communication, especially in the beginning, just because at those younger age groups, they still have, I don't want to say like a fear of authority, but they still kind of have that you're in an authority figure. I need to listen to you. And so every once in a while I get someone like the first week who comes in who's just, they're going to share no matter what. But for the most part, it really takes some time to build that trust. So again, like everything depends, but I think it really needs to be initiated by coaches, but then ideally we're getting to a place where it is more open and it can be initiated by both.
So then Jordan, from a college perspective, if you have coaches initiating that conversation, what do you think are the benefits of that versus athletes initiating that conversation? Where do the benefits come from that aspect?
I think with coming from a coach's standpoint, it's really just letting your athlete know, like, I am here for you. I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm seeing what you're going through. Um, versus having to sit around and wait for them to feel like they're ready to have the conversation. I feel like just letting them know upfront that you're there for them, you're here to support. I find that sometimes that's a little more comfortable for an athlete versus gaining up the courage to go to your coach and say, hey, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. I need help, because that's, as I'm sure everybody that has anything related to mental health knows, asking for help is probably the hardest part. So from that standpoint, that's where I think that a coach approaching it is a positive. But as an athlete, I do think that it's good to have a conversation about something that maybe your coach isn't seeing on the field. A lot of athletes are going through things outside of sports, outside of what their coach is seeing, that can affect what their day to day looks like. So I do feel that it's important that when those things are starting to affect how you process your life or go through your days, that's important for the athlete to bring to the coach's attention.
I think that's a really important point, and I think, a lot of times you can think that you know the full picture, but really we only see our athletes for, 2, 3 hours a day. And we don't, like you said, we don't know what happens outside of those 2, 3 hours, and we don't know what's going on in their family life, their friendships, different relationships like that. And I definitely agree with what you said about kind of setting the tone, from a coach's point of view, and kind of, setting that expectation and that culture of this is something that we can have a conversation about, and you should feel comfortable coming to me. And I think a thing about building those relationships and communication is that sometimes it takes time. But when that time is used to build those relationships, those conversations and that communication will be that much more meaningful. So Shannon, what are some recommendations you would provide to coaches to initiate kind of more consistent contact and communication with their athletes? Because I think sometimes we can start that conversation and not kind of follow up on it, and be consistent with it. So what are some recommendations you would give to coaches?
Yeah, so something that I tell all coaches from the very beginning is get to know your athletes outside of sport. And so I know depending on when people get to practice, but I'll try to get there a little bit early so that if people are there and just kind of sitting around or waiting, I can just chat with them, even just like, how's school going? And I know I have some swimmers who are very, very open and willing to talk, and some that aren't. And so sometimes it feels like pulling teeth a little bit and being like, how was school? What's your favorite class? And really like still just trying to get anything. But then it's so funny because it'll be like a very painful conversation almost to be in and feel very awkward. And then pretty quickly within like a week or two, like they're coming in and like, oh my God, my gov test was so hard. And they just start sharing. And even if like that conversation doesn't really feel pivotal necessarily, it there's just so much like rapport that's built between coaches and athletes. And I think a lot of coaches miss the piece where it's almost like the little things that feel like they don't matter actually are what helps you get to the big heavy stuff that really, really does matter.
I
So,
love that.
so
Taking
yeah,
care of the little things to make sure that the big things are taken care of too down the line.
yeah.
Jordan, so from an athlete's perspective, what would you kind of recommend if an athlete's kind of on the fence, to go and talk to a coach about, any issues they might be having or any struggles they might be having? What would you recommend to those athletes who are kind of trying to take that step and go talk to their coaches?
I think that as an athlete, it shows a lot of courage to be able to ask for help. So I think just realizing within yourself that you are taking a really, really big step and helping yourself get better. Your coach is there to help you outside of just your sport. That is your role as a coach, is to help your athletes through X, Y, and Z, whether it's on the field or off the field. So from an athlete standpoint, it's important to build that relationship with your coach so that your coach knows what's going on, but B, also just for yourself to know that, you're leading yourself in that right direction, is where I feel that it's important as an athlete.
So then thinking about, kind of healthy and sustainable, ways to communicate and unhealthy ways to communicate. Um, so I'll go to each of you. Jordan, what are some kind of examples of healthy and sustainable communication practices that, either you've seen or you use as a coach or were used with you as an athlete that you can think of? And are there any examples that kind of come to mind?
Yeah, I think from a healthy communication standpoint, just having that open line of communication at all times. I think realizing that nothing that your athlete comes to you with is going to be a small situation. So just being there for them through everything is important. If they are confiding in you, then you have to capitalize on that kind of thing. So I feel that the consistent check-ins is a big thing for me, at least. If I'm noticing that there's an issue, then I'm probably not going to wait weeks on weeks to check in with you again because I don't want one extreme to come to the next. So keeping that open line of communication, having those conversations about the small things. We at Shepherd, we do a mental health Thursday where all of our athletes on Thursday, they don't have to send it to all the coaches if they don't have to. It's kind of up to them, but they send us an emoji. And there is an emoji that each emoji has a different meaning, and it could mean I'm struggling with something relating to my sport. I'm struggling with something that's not relating to my sport, but just so that the coaches have an understanding of where their mindset is. And it kind of helps us with game planning, how we're interacting with them at practice, extracurricular activities, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think just having a way for your athletes to communicate with you, if it's not just a full conversation all the time, is an important thing also.
I love that emoji idea. I might steal that. Um, Kind of follow-up question. How do you find that in person communicating with your athletes and having these conversations face to face versus having them, and we can touch on this as we go further, having them fill out a check-in form or kind of use those emojis? What difference do you see in terms of the communication in person versus, I guess, virtually?
Um, I I would really prefer to have that conversation in person. I do feel that as a coach, you are able to be a little more personable. So, just the eye contact, this making them feel like you care, making them feel like you're listening to them. I just really feel like that holds a whole different purpose versus I'm shooting you a text message to check on you. Of course, it's still important, but that face-to-face conversation, I feel like sometimes holds a little bit deeper. You're able to get out a little bit more. Um, so from that standpoint, I honestly would rather have the conversation in person, but of course it's whatever the athlete is comfortable with. So if they're more comfortable with shooting you a text message later to talk about it, then we'll support whatever they want. Um, so yeah, there's my feedback.
Yeah, I agree. Shannon, so kind of unhealthy. Let's flip it on its head here. Unhealthy communication. Um, what are some examples that you've seen? What does that look like? Um, yeah.
I'm in a slightly different situation in that I don't really have text message communication with high school athletes, which I think is very important to establish. And I know like 5 of my swimmers are also coaches on my team. Like we hired them to be junior coaches, work with the younger kids. So we put in a really big, like, here's what the boundaries are for communication around when you're allowed to text me, what you're allowed to text me about. And like I don't give them any of the other adult coaches' phone numbers, or let the other adult coaches have their phone numbers for a number of reasons. And I will just say, I guess more broadly, I've had to really look at what I want for the communication piece for these high school athletes, because unfortunately, with working with college teams, I would say 9 times out of 10, when I would go in as a sports psychology consultant, I was ending up at Title IX at HR for communication issues between athletes and coaches, or I should say between coaches to athletes. And that has been very difficult. And it really allows me though to go, how do I want to model communication for my high school athletes? And knowing that a lot of them are going to swim in college, what do I want them to think is like normal? What do I want them to like? I want them to know that setting a boundary as a coach of don't text me after 8 p.m. unless it's something that's like urgent or important. I want them to know that's the standard. And so if they're getting texts from a coach at 11 p.m. at night, that's, unless it's an emergency or something super weird, I want them to be like, ooh, that's a red flag. So I really look at this as an opportunity to model that good communication for them and kind of set them up for success there. It's not as much specifically on the mental health, but I guess being more in the sports psych world, I look at how do I prevent mental health issues, because I don't think that's the best way to phrase it, but in being very proactive of how do I help enhance their mental health, their performance, and teach them healthy communication, teach them boundaries, teach them respect, teach them listening, all these things which are going to help them when things do come up in relationships with other athletes or coaches, or even just like in their own life of knowing, hey, I can go talk to Coach Shannon. I know we have that line of open communication. I also know I'm not going to text her past like 8 or 9 p.m. unless it is like a code red type thing.
That's something that I feel like we talk about a lot in our panels is boundaries and setting boundaries as coaches and professionals, and definitely applies here. I know as a young coach, I mean, still a young coach, but in my first couple of years coaching, it was definitely something that I struggled with because I wanted to build those relationships and build that trust with athletes. And, having kids text you at 11 o'clock at night, like, probably not the best thing. And I think it's another important kind of aspect of building those standards too is, and I know my college coach did this with me. We had that open line of communication, but she also, kind of enabled us, and empowered us with the tools and the resources that we needed so that if, coach didn't answer, we knew where else to go. We knew where to get a hold of the wellness center or, the different resources that we have on campus so that if one resource isn't available, the other one is. So I think that's another that kind of goes into the boundaries as well. Not having all of that on one person to communicate and to help you and support you when there's really like a whole village who's there supporting you too. Jordan, so we talked about kind of more acute communication. From a college perspective, what do you feel is the most effective way for coaches and athletes to maintain long-term healthy communication? So the way I think of this is alumni relations. When, if a kid has gone through their 4 years and may not have had the easiest 4 years and struggled with some things, how do you make sure to check on them as they go through life as a new grad and getting a job and, all of the things that graduation kind of brings?
Yeah, this is something that I feel my college coach was really, really great with. You got to a point in your senior year where you almost couldn't wait to graduate because you were just so excited for the relationship that came afterwards. And that is so important. My college coach was there to help me through navigating a new job, navigating through what it was like, life after sports, because it's scary at first sometimes. So I think from that standpoint, knowing that your coach is somebody that is always going to be there to support you, even beyond athletics, is so important. And that comes from not just my college coach. I have other coaches that have been like that. So I do feel that it comes from them giving a little bit and communication and wanting to build the relationship and those emotions being important to them. Um, but just like we talked about earlier, the small things, like paying attention to the small things, following up on the small things, and making sure that you are just their biggest supporter behind whoever they would say is their biggest, to support them through life and just really set them up in the best way possible. Um,
I know something that goes a long way that my boss actually does is she texts alumni on their birthdays and says happy birthday to a lot of them. And I know, uh, texting when you see that someone landed a new job or, had a trip. Like there have been alumni that we've reached out to who we saw, went to Europe and had a trip and stuff like that. So like you said, Jordan, like paying attention to the little things, and that trip may not seem like a big thing, but just checking in about it can go a long way. So I think that's really important. Shannon, are there any kind of with teams that you've worked with or teams that you've coached, what would you kind of define a successful culture of healthy communication as? Like, what were kind of your flagship kind of ways of seeing that, and how is that maintained?
Yeah, so I actually don't have a super great answer for this. In that I guess just solely speaking from coaching with swimming, because when I'm with sports psych teams, I'm usually not with them for tremendously long or not in that same type of role. So I don't really want to comment on some of that. But I know like with our swim team, we're really lucky in that we've established a good relationship with our swimmers that have graduated and are in college, and like they'll come home and train with us, but we also have them coach a lot of the time. It's not a requirement, but a lot of them do choose to come back and coach, whether it's over the summer or breaks. And that's it's just, I think it's really nice, and even showing like the younger kids that one, like you can swim in college, like that coaching is an option. It just kind of, it allows even for ways of communication that maybe they're not going to communicate certain things with us, but they're willing to talk to even like some former teammates who are now working on the staff or various things. I haven't been at my team for long enough to really have a ton that have graduated like college. Because I think, yeah, I was gonna say I started in 2019, so I think I have like one kid who's graduated. So we don't have a super great culture around that necessarily. I don't have great examples. But I know the same thing of like texting people on their birthdays. Like I know all of our college athletes, like when they're going to really big swim meets, I just shoot them a text message, and it's really funny sometimes the responses that I get back, and seeing how that evolves year to year, from just a quick like thanks to just like the goofiness that evolves as you start to just become like people instead of, oh, coach athlete. It gets a little bit more equal. So yeah, I don't have a super great answer with that, but I do think it's very important to build that longer term relationship.
No, I love that. Um, so then, Shannon, I'll come back to you for this too. What are some tips that you would give coaches to help their student athletes kind of more generally with their mental health? Are there any kind of go-to resources or any go-to kind of practices that you do with your team?
Yeah, so we have don't have a perfect system with this. We're still changing it up as we go. But I implemented kind of like a mental health Friday type thing where it actually, I've branded it as Fun Friday, Fun Practice Friday. They don't know that it's a mental skills, mental performance Friday. But so we do just like little things. Sometimes we do games, sometimes it's team bonding. One thing that I really like is I got these just like composition notebooks for like 99 cents, and I give them to the swimmers, and I say, sometimes I'll give them prompts for it. Sometimes it's just like whatever you feel like sharing. And I let them really just let it be a place for communication between themselves and me. Because I know sometimes it's hard to verbalize, and sometimes it is hard to look your coach in the eye and tell them something. It's been very, very interesting that the boys on my team write significantly more than the girls. I have like a couple that just write bullet points, but sometimes I'll give them like 15, 20 minutes, and I'll have like pages and pages in the boys. And that's so, I want to say it's interesting. There's part of me that is not shocked about it. But when I talk to some of the other coaches on our team, they're like, oh, I bet the boys don't want anything to do with that. And like they laughed at first, but then they were really into it. So we do little things like that. And then even I think it's just good for coaches to like just talk about mindset, mental performance, mental health. Like sometimes before a really challenging set at practice, we'll give them a little bit of extra rest or something and say like, all right, get yourselves like mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, we go over like all the get yourself ready in all of these different ways. And we're not necessarily having a conversation about it, but we're even just saying, this is an important part of performing. I know I even make a point sometimes if I'm struggling of coming in of just like, not saying anything super personal, but just like, oh, like I'm having a tough day, like struggling a little bit. And sometimes they'll ask what's going on. I don't typically share a ton, but even just letting them hear that like coach isn't perfect. Coach doesn't have, we're not stuffing all this stuff down. I just try to make it like little integrations. And that typically I find is received a lot better than like a sit down hour of going over stuff and lectures and slides, because kids aren't really into that. So like the more it's just integrated into conversations and practice, that seems to be the best received.
I love what you said there, like coach isn't perfect. And I think a lot of the times, like we talked about, that kind of power distance in the relationship between coach and player can be a pretty hindering factor in communication. So like you said, I think just remembering at the end of the day that it is communicating between a coach and a player, between two humans who are the same, and we do the same things, and we want the same things, and we have the same goals. So I think keeping that at the kind of forefront and not letting the kind of power relationship get too big is a super important part of it too. So Jordan, for you and your teams, what are some tips that you would give to coaches to help their student athletes with their mental health? And are there any kind of go-to things that you use with your teams?
I would say from a coach's standpoint, I think just giving your athlete resources outside of you is so important. Um, you're only one person, you can only do so much, and there are so many resources out there that, as an athlete, I wish I knew about. So I think that informing your athlete of, hey, there's someone to talk to on campus, there's someone that's down the street that specializes in, athlete mental health or whatever it may be. I think that being a resource to set your athlete up for success is the number one key to that. Um, as far as I know, I don't really necessarily have too much experience from a coaching standpoint. I typically our head coach is going to handle it from there. But I do know as an athlete personally, going to a fitness and performance gym was pretty life changing for me as an athlete. Just having a mental health training on top of a workout was unbelievable. And just having other athletes around me that were there for the same goal. And you just have, again, another set of resources there to really motivate you to be the best that you can be. And I think that that's important for A, making you a better player, but B, just helping you navigate through the day-to-day life.
Awesome. So the last question I'll ask you both. If coaches or professionals want to receive more information from either of you, where can they find you on socials, or, where can they get in touch with you? So Shannon, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so I was really smart and made all my socials and my website and my email all involve my last name, which is hard to spell and hard to pronounce. But everything is just Mulcahy Performance. So either mulcahyperformance.com is my website. That's my Instagram handle. mulcahyperformance@gmail.com is my email. Just basically type in my last name and you'll probably find me somewhere.
Awesome. Jordan?
Same thing. All of my social media is just first name, last name, Jordan Sauro. And then my email address is jordan.sauro00@gmail.
Awesome. Do either of you have anything else you want to add to this conversation? Anything we missed?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me. I think that this is really important, and it's good for athletes to continue to hear from coaches, to know that they're not alone. So thank you.
Thanks
Yeah,
thanks for coming. Thank you for taking the time out of your night and sharing your perspectives with us. We appreciate it.